Welcome to Comic Books in You. Today we are going to be covering Nyobi Origins #1. Nyobi Origins #1. This is a book by Canadian author Larry Higgins it's been ongoing for a little while here with different subtitles. Birthright, Origins are two of them. There's regular Nyobi as well that's floating around. And it's been going through crowdfunding, through what I see here, and now is being published under Atlantic Press as well. So this is a thing that you can actually get in comic book stores if you're lucky and Diamond is not completely retarded, which is always a problem. But thankfully, it's easy enough to get. You don't need to fight with running around and trying to find the current Kickstarter to try to get the current books and the catch-up packages. You normally can just order this one off whatever retailer you have, because they probably have some back copies laying around. So for an indie comic, it's a bit different from what we normally see. The crowdfunding campaign for this book was actually pretty good. We're raising $24,374 for 400 backers, which is a very good indie crowdfunder. If you look around the different books that we've looked at, and even books that we haven't looked at, this is a decent enough number, especially for something that's more indie akin to a floppy than to a graphic novel, which is what we see often from these campaigns. I haven't seen any weird ongoing things about this particular campaign either. This was a little bit before I got back into American comics more or less full time. So I'm just happy to look into it from the outside at this point. As the title denotes, this is the origin story for the titular character, Nyobi Lee, or her official name would probably be Matsume Nyobi, who's a Japanese idol who was part of a group called the Geisha Dolls. Well, at the start of this story, she's still part of the Geisha Dolls. Her co-idols don't seem to like her all that much. One of them is a bit of a pushover. The other one really doesn't seem to like her. He does seem to have a very average, idol kind of life, which is very, very stressful. But she does have some weird recurring nightmare all the time where she's in some kind of secret facility and all sorts of weird things happen. And she also seems to be able to make gates and teleport through them, which is pretty useful, but unexpected at the same time. And we're going to follow her adventures throughout Nyobi's stories. Our villain in this story is the ninja Akio, who shows up to try to kidnap our heroine. She seems to have a real propensity to kick people, especially in the face, which might be useful sometimes, but in some cases would probably cause you to have very difficult conversations with people. It also seems to have a pair of energy tessons, which is a pretty good weapon, one that I always approve of, having actually played along with some war fans back in the days. And she was apparently trained by one of the good guys. I assume there's a lot more to this going on here, and we'll probably learn more of it in Origins 2, which is coming out next year, or in the other Nyobi books. We're also introduced to Sybil, who's a rather overpowered individual when it comes to the aid of our hero. She's referred to as an old hag by Akio, but isn't really that old, and she doesn't remember actually training Akio, so that's a bit weird. She seems to have a mix of telekinetic and telepathic abilities, which is a very good mix of powers overall. Not one that is unexpected or weird, but one that works generally fairly well in a character setup. Our story begins as Nyobi is laying in bed before a big performance the next morning, and she's fairly stressed out about life and her career and everything that's going on. Unfortunately, she keeps having those nightmares, so she sees a little girl called Molly, and she disappears, and she's in a red corridor, and all sorts of weird things are happening. And we then see some weird dark elf looking lady that wants to kill her. That's probably not good. And as the nightmare ends, it seems to trigger her latent teleportation powers, and she lands in the middle of the corridor where her other two co-stars are resting, and she gets a bit chastised by the one I would assume is the oldest one, because she is the tallest of the bunch. It's not well explained. The next day, however, the Geisha Doll are having their concert, and things start out really well. Things, however, kind of get out of hand as a fan grabs Nyobi's leg and try to drag her into the crowd, and it causes her power to trigger and lands her in a parking lot. Not sure if anybody was injured during that incident. I'm not sure how the powers, the teleporting gates like this work. It must have caused a bit of a commotion, that's for sure. Nyobi does start panicking as she is in that parking lot. She doesn't have too much time to panic as someone decides to kick her in the face. Akio does want to kidnap Nyobi and doesn't really mind damaging the goods. And she seems to have an history with our heroine, even though Nyobi has no understanding why or how. And Akio easily overpowers her, because, I mean, she's an idol. The other one seems to be a trained ninja. Kind of a disparity in skills there. Nyobi's knocked down, but she uses her power to kind of run away, and it kind of works out until Akio sends her henchmen after her. Not sure if they're robotic ninjas or people in robotic ninja suits, but they're actually pretty cool designs. Nyobi is knocked out, but before she's taken away, Sybil shows up and she starts fighting Akio and the Ench ninjas. Akio and her goons are completely outmatched. Sybil is just way overpowered. This is really a one-sided affair. The ninja robot soldier guys really just get taken out like chumps. Akio's a little bit harder, but not a huge challenge either. Akio is stuck, and Sybil's trying to read her mind. She does manage to kick her way out of it and run away before all of her secrets are revealed to Sybil, outside of the fact that Sybil learns that she apparently is the one that would have trained Akio, even though she has no memories of it. Nyobi then recovers in an hospital where she meets with Roman Cole, who's the leader or a representative for the Aberration Response Division, ARD, and an unmasked Sybil, and they kind of talk about what happened to her. ARD doesn't seem to be an horrible monster organization like we sometimes see in these kinds of books, and they do want Nyobi to work with them, and if she doesn't want to, well, she would be free to go as long as they determine that she's not a threat to others. Not sure with her powers if she could be a threat to others or how her powers really work. It's not completely explained in this one. Probably something we would see in the other books. Nyobi does seem to want to work with ARD and decides to work with them as a people in public relation and puts her idol career on hold. Not sure how her two former colleagues take it. And then we skip to 30 years in the future where Akio meets with what I assume is her boss, where they decide to dispatch another ninja to try to resolve the Nyobi situation. There's a few confusing bits in this particular book, but nothing that I find unusual, especially in an origin story that would probably have a sequel. So there's what you need for a basic setup. You've got cool characters, you've got just enough plot to string things along, and you've got cool action scenes to keep things moving. So nothing out in this story is out of the ordinary or causing major issues in terms of anything thematic or anything of the sort. This is the standard cover that comes with the Antarctic Press logo on it. It's the one that I've got, and if you start looking, you can see that there's an extremely large variety of Nyobi Origins covers, and same with each of the Nyobi books. Is one thing the author is really doing quite a lot of. I ever am a huge fan of variant covers, but in some cases, they work. I'm usually more of a, maybe if you do 2 or 3 of them. For Nyobi, normally we have a significantly higher number. This one here, however, is a very, very good one, in my opinion. Got a very cool and sexy pose on it, which is very reminiscent of your smaller press comics from the 1990s. I really, really enjoy the neon signs in the background. It does give it that, regular Asian look. Very 80s, I would say, however, but it doesn't really matter in the long run. And I like how it bleeds at the bottom rather than being extremely clear. This is a very, very competently done portion here. I do find the top right portion with the branding to be a little bit weak. I would have gone with, little windows on a building, a moon, something of the sort, just to fill out that dark area. It's not an awful thing, and I can understand using negative space. It's up to anybody who's looking at this here. The branding itself is not terrible. It's not the best branding I've ever seen for a comic, obviously. But it's not a bad one either. And it's one that's pretty much set in stone at this point. It's the one that's being used on almost all Nyobi comics. As such, it works as intended. The cover for this is a bit of an hybrid of a cardstock and decent paper. It has a weird feel to it. Not sure if it's Antarctic Press that does it, because the other Antarctic Press comic that I got in the same bunch has the same feel to the cover. It's just weird feeling, but it's not bad. I mean, it's a very decent quality, and I'm pretty sure it will keep fairly well. Pages are all quality gloss paper, basic stable binding. It's a floppy, but it works perfectly well for what this is supposed to be. And as a longer floppy, you do get what you pay for, unlike when you sometimes get some of those DC or Marvel books. The back cover has a cute, super deformed Nyobi, while the back flap has an ad for Nyobi Outbreak, which was going to finance next after this one. This has already gone out, from what I understand. Paratext-wise as well, we get a few ads at the back for other Antarctic Press project. America's Really Got Heroes, which I have no idea what it is. We got World War III, which looks pretty cool, but I don't know much about it. Yonmaru, which, another thing I don't know about, might want to look into it, because that looks fairly cool. And just a regular ad for Antarctic Press and their Patreon, and Fred Perry's Gold Digger. All of those ads are perfectly aligned with what we see in the book and Antarctic Press, so nothing unusual there and nothing bad either. Not sure if any of those were revenue generating or just introduced there by Antarctic Press. This is the kind of thing that is above my pay grade, obviously. If we go over to art, well, the first thing you need to know about this is, even though the covers do ramp up the sexy quite a bit, sometimes being quite over the top, in my opinion, once you get in the actual book, there's nothing unusual there. It's more or less an all-ages book, and I've actually seen far worse things in all-ages mangas out there. So this is not a book that you need to hide from anybody in your house. The character designs in general are quite good. The costumes are perfectly fine for what they're supposed to be. Sybil has that pretty much power suit. Akio looks fine as a ninja. The ninja soldiers also look fine. Idol costumes for Nyobi and her friends, also perfectly understandable and workable. But there are some nice things in there as well. Small details that make the costumes just a step up from just being samey or flat or boring like we sometimes see in other comics. Akio has those metal pads on her knees and on her shoulders, which have a bit of texture to them. That actually looks really good. Same with the fishnet on the side of her bodice. This also works really well to give some presence to the character. Sybil's armor has a feel of heaviness to it. It does look heavy from how it looks, and the cape has nice folds to it. It gives it that extra depth, which makes it very nice. Akio is a little bit weaker, though, because I would have put on sandals on her feet, even though she ends up kicking people all the time. It's a very, very bad idea to walk around in socks, especially in parking lots and all other places when you're getting into fights. That is a part of a costume that you need to look into when you look at ninjas. You might think they're wearing socks. No, they're generally with the sandals and things like that for protection of their own feet more than anything else. We do have some very nice action scenes as well, including with our pre-heroine. I mean, at this point, she is not a hero, Nyobi and Akio, which is nice to see because we don't see that a whole lot nowadays in mainstream comics. Most of the time nowadays, Nyobi would have defeated Akio on her own, and Sybil would have been there and congratulated her on how good she was, etc. That's the kind of mindset you end up seeing in a lot of modern comics and modern media in general. It's really nice to see Nyobi just wanting to be like, nope, I'm getting out of here. I don't want to get involved in this, and not be the strong, stoic, competent, and emotionless woman that Disney keeps trying to push on people, basically. We get another very nice action scene afterwards with Akio and Sybil, and this also works really well because we get a nice display of Sybil's supernatural powers, which is not a thing that we always get very well in some comics. We've been looking at Doom Patrol a lot recently, and in a lot of those books, this works fairly well. And here, we're in the same kind of camp. We've got the powers being used and being represented really well, which is always a plus. If you start looking into it into depth, yes, this is very 90s image style. This has that particular feel of Jim Lee, Silvestri, etc. Here we've got Voodoo from the original Wildcats. Her current costume in DC is nowhere as interesting, let's say. There's a few bits, however, that are a bit rougher around the edges. Some of the poses of some of the characters are fairly rough. This jump kick here doesn't work at all, if you ask me. It's not enough to take you out of the story, but if you spend some time reading the book, like I do, you're going to start feeling that there's really something off about it. There's a few facial expressions that are a little bit out of hand here. Of course, here I'm just putting the entire crowd in the back. I wouldn't need to go and dig up a particular panel here that I can't remember which one it is, and I didn't take a picture of it. It's mostly fine, but every once in a while there's a thing that's just jumping out and you have to skip over. There's one car that we see in the parking lot. It's rather weak. You know me, I'm a big fan of good mechanical designs and mechanical drawings. So this kind of came a bit sideways to me. Panel work in general is really busy, but it doesn't detract you from reading, and it's fairly easy to follow. There's nothing unusual about the panel work either. A few of the panels are weirdly cut and things like that, but that's nothing that we haven't seen since the mid-'80s. So nothing that would prevent you from reading this book appropriately. As far as the story and the other elements goes, as someone who did study Japanese language and culture in university, there's a few annoying things about Nyobi's name. Lee, even if it's a stage name, is a Korean or Chinese surname, which would generally not be used in Japan due to cultural differences, let's say, between these nations. And Nyobi, is a Greek name, which could happen. I mean, I've seen some weird Japanese names over the years. I mean, Light Yagami in that note as an example. There is kanjis to his name. They've basically translated it, and Nyobi would be translatable as well in Japanese and usable in kanji. This is not a deal breaker, but for someone who's been into culture, it could be a little bit jarring. But outside of that, really, if anybody says, der cultural appropriation, fuck off, fuck right off, turn right, keep going, keep fucking off. One of the best Japanese heroine in history is Yoko Tsuno, which was made by a Belgian guy originally in the 60s and 70s. You do the character you want as a creator to craft the stories you want to craft. If you want to write a story about a Aboriginal leader in Australia and you're actually a guy who lives in Nevada, I don't care. As long as you can write a good story, that's all that really matters in the end. Also, Les Exilés de Kifa is one of the weirder Yoko Tsuno story, but it's really cool if you ever get a translation of that. If we look at this book as an origin story, this is perfectly functional. We've got all the elements that we need to understand the character and interactions with the world at large, and understanding the basis of her power set, even though she does no direct control over it or no abilities over it. This is what we like as a basic origin story. Should it be the first book you write or the first book you release? A lot of people out there will say yes, but really, this is not what you should be doing at first. Your first stories with your characters should generally be those high-action, high-octane stories to get the people hooked in. Once they're hooked, then you can release the origin story and people will be interested in getting it. If you start with the origin story and people just don't gravitate towards the character, you're just going to waste that character and it's not going to be usable in the future. So that's a thing that many creators need to think of. We don't get much girl idol band problems in this, and it's a thing that I would probably have wanted to have more of, because this is a truly cutthroat environment in Korea and Japan especially. And I would have expected to see the mean old producer manager in there to be on top of everybody and driving them to do things they don't want to do. Not that kind of thing, but overworking, which is a very common issue there. Here, probably mostly because of how much pages you have and what you're supposed to do. It just seems to be a bit weaker bit here as far as Nyobi's origins. Now for the general problem of mutants. This is a problem that I generally don't bring up, but in the end here, this is a good place to talk about it, I guess. If you had a girl who could actually teleport on a stage in an idol band, talent management would be dropping millions of dollars to hire her. Oh no, she's got weird powers. Who cares? She can do her own light show, and she can do her own special effects on stage. With a decent lapel mic and very good lighting, you're going to be making millions. Imagine Taylor Swift with that ability. We would be talking about her concerts even more than we are talking about them now. When you're dealing with mutants or people with strange powers, there are some that are downright dangerous and downright weird. Okay, let's face it, Nightcrawler probably wouldn't have a very good career or life if we were talking about mutants. If we're looking at Robot Man and Doom Patrol, well, his life is pretty much terrible because he has no feeling, he has no really human interaction. I mean, the Doom Patrol is probably the group where the weirdness of their powers would make them dangerous far more. While if we look at the mutants in the X-Men, the biggest problem is Cyclops, who can't control his power because of an accident. That's an issue. But most of the others, I mean, Colossus can turn himself into steel and is super strong. That's a wonderful power to have and a wonderful thing to have in general. I mean, I would hire a guy like that to work on a rig or to work in a mine in a matter of seconds. Wolverine, I mean, I don't understand why the Canadian and American government have been experimenting on all these people. You just dump tons of money on them rather than experimenting on them, and you have them actually work for you. We've seen that in Berserker, and it actually worked really good. Imagine Mystique. Mystique could make a ton of money in showbiz. You need to hire one actress to do 10 roles. And you don't even have to fight with voiceovers or anything. It just works. So that's a problem that's in those kinds of stories in general, because we think of that way because of X-Men and Doom Patrol, let's say, where they're supposed to be ostracized. But in a regular society, people would be exploiting them for all they can, and they would be millionaires because of it. Let's get back into it. We don't spend a huge amount of time explaining the powers. We know that they're G-Noms, genetic anomalies, and that's about all we really get. Mangas are really bad at this nowadays, especially. That's probably something that came from Hunter x Hunter and some of the other books from that author, where he does go at length on how do the powers actually work. And a lot of people have taken to that just because it allows you to fill space in your book. Modern comics have also taken an inspiration from that, and we waste a lot of time explaining where do the powers come from, why are they like this, etc., when the answer could simply be because it is, and that's how books normally should work. You don't need those long explanations most of the time. Nyobi rejecting her powers at first is also a nice, interesting bit here, and at the end of the story, she also seems to start accepting it and wanting to do good thanks to it. That's not a thing that you always see in these types of stories, especially like we've been saying, but it's nice to see in this particular story, and it gives a lot of potential room for growth to our character. Ard not coming out in immediately as nefarious, sneaky, or downright evil is really nice as well. This is a trope that I'm really sick of. Evil corporations and evil government organization. Sometimes it's nice to just have, good people be good people. They do exist in the world. I know it's hard to imagine, but it's nice to see that in books as well every once in a while. As far as pacing goes, there's a few things I want to discuss. Honestly, the dream sequence at the start of the book is fun to give us some early action in the book, but I do feel that those pages should have been used to develop the character and the idol band more instead of just giving us more action. It would just have fleshed out the whole thing a whole lot more. We are in a lived-in world, however, which is a huge plus when we look at these kind of series and these kinds of book. We're not just spending the entire book doing world building. It just builds itself through the story, which is a very nice balance of things overall. With the number of pages you have here, there's nothing that's rushed, nothing that's slowed down. Really shows that the writer and the editor knew what they were doing when they were building and setting out this book. Overall, is this the greatest book ever done? No. It does what it sets out to do perfectly well. It gives us just enough to actually get us hooked and want to see more. Would it have worked if it had really been Nyobi's first outing? Probably not. I'll be honest here. The fact that you can get this book off almost any retailer is a great plus. We don't need to wait for a Kickstarter. We don't need to wait for anything in particular. We don't need to dig up an eBay account or anything like that. We just turn around, ask our local CaptCan provider and say, hey, I want it, and you get it shipped for outrageous prices because shipping is outrageous nowadays. This particular book deals with very simple themes, but I've been told that Birthright and Outbreak are a lot more serious in terms of the themes and in terms of the discussions that go in them. I'll have to review them when I get them, since that's a book that you can easily get for $5-6 from a normal retailer and is perfectly entertaining. That's an easy recommend for me. If you like, of course, the 90s style action comics, if you like the deep introverted character pieces, probably not for you. But for almost everybody that would be watching these reviews, I think it would be a nice little investment. So I thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Thank you for listening for so long. Keep on reading comics. Keep on enjoying them. I'll keep reviewing and analyzing them. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.